On Jicarón Island, off the Pacific coast of Panama, researchers set up motion-triggered cameras to study a group of unusual monkeys. White-faced Capuchins, one of the few monkey populations known to use stone tools. That was what the cameras were there to record. But in early 2022, they recorded something else entirely. A young male Capuchin appeared carrying an infant Howler monkey, a completely different species. At first, it looked like an anomaly. One young male had somehow taken possession of an infant from another primate, but then another did it, and another. In the 2025 current biology study, Goldsborough and colleagues documented at least 5 male Capuchins carrying at least 11 infant Howler monkeys between 2022 and 2023. The infants were too young to survive without their mothers, and most, or all, appeared to have died. So this was no longer just one strange interaction between two species. It was repeated, it was harmful, and it did not appear to give the Capuchins any clear benefit. And that repetition mattered, because unusual behaviours do not always stay with one Capuchin. Some become local traditions, spreading through social learning within a group. So, when multiple Capuchins began carrying infant Howlers, researchers were no longer looking at one strange abduction. They were looking at the possibility of a harmful behaviour spreading through a group. To understand how this could happen, we first need to understand Capuchins themselves. Capuchins are New World monkeys found across Central and South America. But Capuchin does not refer to one single kind of monkey. Broadly, Capuchins are divided into gracile Capuchins, usually placed in the genus Cebus, and robust Capuchins, usually placed in the genus Sapajus. Most are roughly cat-sized, with bodies around 30 to 56 centimeters long, not including their tail. Depending on the species and sex, they can weigh from a little over 1 kilogram to around 4 kilograms. But the important differences are not only physical. Across their range, Capuchins live in very different environments, from dense forests to dry, open habitats. Despite this diversity, many of the problems they face have something in common: food. Food is often not simply found and eaten, but hidden, sealed, buried, defended, or difficult to handle. That is why Capuchins are often described as extractive foragers, animals that have to get food out of whatever is protecting it. In fact, their intelligence is often best exemplified by how they manipulate objects around them when trying to solve these foraging conundrums. But not every problem is mechanical. In studies of bearded Capuchins, researchers have noted that they prey on some snakes while avoiding poisonous and constricting species. So alongside access, there is judgment: what is worth approaching, what is worth handling, and what is better left alone. That combination, flexible problem solving, varied environments, and social living, is what makes Capuchins so useful for studying tradition. Different populations can face different problems, discover different solutions, and sometimes preserve those solutions locally. For clarity, in animal behaviour, a tradition is usually understood as a behavioural practice that persists over time, is shared by multiple members of a group, and is passed on, at least in part, through socially aided learning. So when a behaviour is repeated, observed, and picked up by others, it can become more than one animal's trick. It can become part of a group's way of life. And in Capuchins, the clearest place to see this is with tools. In several unrelated populations of Capuchins, individuals have been observed using stones as hammers and anvils to crack open hard nuts and seeds. From a distance, the action looks basic, but this is not just a monkey hitting a nut with a rock. The food has to be positioned so it does not roll away. The stone has to be heavy enough to crack the shell, but light enough to control. And each strike has to be adjusted depending on how the shell responds. In 2009, Wieselberger and colleagues tested whether wild bearded Capuchins were choosing stones at random. They found that the monkeys selected effective hammer stones, tending to choose heavier stones when heavier stones were better suited to the task. So this is not just object play with a snack at the end. The monkeys genuinely seem sensitive to the physical properties of the tool, weight, usability, and whether it actually works for the problem in front of them. And archaeological evidence makes this even more significant. In 2019, Falotico and colleagues reported Capuchin stone tool evidence extending back around 3,000 years, showing that wild Capuchins can leave a long-term material record of repeated tool use. Now, this doesn't mean Capuchins are refining their stone tools in the cumulative way humans do, but it does demonstrate that a behavior can persist beyond a single lifetime. and it can even leave traces in the landscape. Stone tools are the most obvious example of Capuchin technology, because the function is so clear, smashing things open. But Capuchin tool use does not stop at cracking nuts. At Serra de Capivara National Park in Brazil, bearded capuchins have been observed using tools in a more predatory context, getting live prey out of places their hands cannot reach. In a 2022 study, the clearest cases involved stick probes being inserted into rock crevices where lizards were hiding to poke, stir, and drive the animal out into the open. And this wasn't an isolated trick. Sticks have also been used to access things such as water, arthropods, and the contents of insect nests. More strikingly, the probes were often modified beforehand, with parts detached, trimmed, or thinned before use. But that kind of preparation did not stop with the stick itself. In some observations, Capuchins used stones and sticks in sequence. A stone first widened a hole or broke through a part of a barrier, after which a stick probe was inserted into the opening. And that kind of sequential tool use matters, because it shows the animal is not just using an object opportunistically, but organizing multiple actions in the right order to solve a single foraging problem. But some Capuchin behaviors go further still. Instead of using an object for its shape, weight, or reach, they seem to use it for its chemistry. So far, the tools have worked mechanically, but a millipede is different. The useful part is not its basic structure, it's what the animal releases when disturbed. Capuchins have been observed rubbing different materials into their fur, including plants, fruits, ants, and chemically defended arthropods. This behavior is usually called anointing. Millipede anointing is especially interesting because the monkey does not simply pick up the animal and rub it on itself. It bites, crushes, or irritates it, causing the millipede to release defensive chemicals, and then works those secretions through its own fur. So the capuchin is not just using a substance it happens to find, it is manipulating another animal in a way that makes the useful substance appear. In wild, wedge-capped capuchins, millipede anointing appears to be seasonal, becoming more common during the rainy period, when mosquitoes and other biting insects are likely to be more abundant. Researchers have suggested that the secretions may help protect the monkeys from biting insects, an idea strengthened by later work showing that millipede benzoquinones can deter mosquitoes, and that the smell of those same compounds encourages capuchins to rub the material further into their fur. This places the behavior within a broader idea known as zoopharmacognosy, animals using substances from their environment in ways that may help against parasites, infection, or other physical problems. During anointing, capuchins can appear intensely absorbed, and individuals may compete for access for the same material. This has led to the speculation that the secretions might have some pleasurable, narcotic, or hallucinogenic effect. But there is no solid evidence for that. Competition by itself does not imply intoxication. It might simply reflect the fact that the material is useful and limited. And millipedes are not always fiercely monopolized. Social forms of anointing have also been observed. During said events, several monkeys rub in close contact, apparently helping spread the substance across parts of the body that are otherwise difficult to reach. Taken together, that pattern fits tropical protection more than a drug-like effect. Now, stone tools, stick probes, and millipede anointing all depend on the capuchin's respective environments. A capuchin cannot crack nuts without stones, probe crevices without sticks, or anoint itself with millipedes that are not there. But availability is not the same as tradition. The material still has to be noticed, the behavior still has to be repeated, and crucially, other capuchins have to observe it, and in some form, pick it up. But in capuchins, spreading a behavior does not usually mean teaching in the human sense. An adult does not deliberately demonstrate each step, correct mistakes, or guide a youngster through a task. Social learning is usually more indirect. A young capuchin watching another crack a nut may not copy every movement exactly, but it can learn what matters. Which foods are worth opening, which stones are worth picking up, which surfaces work as anvils, and what a successful outcome looks like. In 2017, Barrett and colleagues found evidence for payoff-biased social learning in wild white-faced capuchins. The monkeys were more likely to adopt behaviors that produced better rewards, rather than simply copying whatever behavior was most common. And younger capuchins were also generally more likely to acquire new behaviors than older individuals. So capuchin traditions do not spread because monkeys copy everything they see. They spread because individuals notice successful behaviours, experiment with them, which then leads to some of those behaviours being taken up by others and maintained by future generations. And our Howler case on Jicarón fits that pattern in one important respect. The carriers were not adult females, and they were not experienced adult hunters. They were immature males, the same demographic thought to be especially prone to innovation and social learning, making them plausible candidates to originate or adopt a novel behaviour. But this time, the behaviour is much harder to explain. Socially learned behaviours are generally expected to spread because they solve a problem or produce a better outcome. The Jicarón behaviour seemed to do neither. So why is it that this behaviour spread at all? The Jicarón case was not the first time a Capuchin had been linked to an infant howler monkey. In 2014, researchers reported a case of infant howler abduction and predation in Brazil. An adult male tufted Capuchin took an infant from a female howler and disappeared into the forest with it. So the basic act, a Capuchin taking a howler infant, was not completely without precedent. But Jicarón was different because researchers could consistently follow the behaviour over time. The first carrier was Joker, a subadult male. In early 2022, he was seen carrying infant howlers for days at a time. He was not observed eating them or actively attacking them, and his handling appeared comparatively gentle. At that stage, one possible explanation was misdirected alloparental care, a caregiving response aimed at the wrong species. But there was a problem with that interpretation. Adoption and infant carrying in Capuchins are usually associated with females, and Joker is a young male. More crucially, and the real crux of that point, is that the infants were too young to survive without milk from their mothers. Either way, the sightings then suddenly stopped. For several months, there was no evidence of howler carrying. At that point, Joker's behaviour could still have been a one-off, one young Capuchin trying something unusual. But in September 2022, howler infants appeared again, and this time there were new carriers. 3 new Capuchins were seen carrying infants, and in some sightings, 2 infant howlers were being carried at the same time. Over the full 15-month study period, researchers documented 5 young male Capuchins carrying at least 11 infant howlers. The infants in question did not appear to be abandoned. Adult howlers were recorded calling to them from nearby trees, and the infants themselves responded, giving lost calls. Some also tried to escape from their Capuchin carriers. So the behaviour looked increasingly like abduction rather than adoption. And it doesn't stop there. The infants also moved between carriers. In some cases, they switched several times within a day. These transfers did not seem to involve strong competition over who carried the infant. Instead, one carrier might lose interest or abandon the infant, and another would pick it up. The later carriers also behaved differently from Joker. Some continued travelling or using stone tools while infants clung to their backs or bellies. When the infants attempted to nurse, carriers sometimes pushed them away, bit them, or appeared irritated. By this point, the behaviour no longer resembled misplaced care. Yet, it was not straightforward predation either. The Capuchins were never observed deliberately killing or eating the infants. Instead, the infants slowly deteriorated while in their possession. The behaviour also failed to provide an obvious social benefit. In fact, carriers were sometimes the targets of aggression from other Capuchins, suggesting that the infants were not functioning as valued social objects or as clear status signals. Based on these factors, the researchers felt inclined to suggest that this socially transmitted behaviour may have no clear adaptive function at all. They even described the behaviour as a kind of animal fashion or social fad, something that began with one individual and was then picked up by others, not because it was useful, but because it became noticeable. If you've seen my video on orcas, it's a little like the temporary return of salmon hats, a behaviour that spread through part of the population despite having no obvious purpose. But for Jicarón's Capuchins, that explanation may now be more complicated. In correspondence, Dr. Goldsboro, the lead on this expedition, told me that the behaviour appears to still be ongoing. Capuchins were seen carrying howler infants in the most recent videos reviewed from January 2026. More work is needed to confirm whether the behaviour continued uninterrupted or whether it stopped and reappeared, but either way, it suggests that infant carrying may have persisted in some form for around 4 years, which would be a long time for a fad. But it's not impossible, and Jicarón itself may be the key to the answer, because the island has reduced predation risk, lower species richness, and a Capuchin population already known for rare stone tool use. As such, the researchers suggest that free time, behavioural opportunity, and understimulation may have helped a strange, non-adaptive tradition emerge. So if the newest sightings are confirmed, the Jicarón behaviour is not just remarkable because it spread, it is remarkable because it may have kept going, despite having no clear function. So, are Capuchins cultural animals? Not in the human sense. They do not have language, writing, symbolic art, or cumulative technology that builds across generations in the way ours does. But animal culture is usually defined more simply. Behaviours that are socially learned, differ between groups, persist over time, and cannot be explained by genetics or ecology alone. And by that definition, Capuchins are difficult to ignore. Some populations use stones to crack open hard foods, some use probes to reach hidden prey or inaccessible materials. Some anoint themselves with chemically defended animals. Together, they show that Capuchin traditions are not one thing. They can be practical, social, mechanical, or even chemical. And that is what makes Jicarón so unsettling. The Howler carrying does not fit the reassuring version of animal culture. It has no clear nutritional, reproductive, or social benefit. It is harmful to infants of another species, but that did not prevent it from being repeated and picked up by other immature males. And that's something important for our human brains to wrap around. Because social transmission is not a moral filter. It doesn't only preserve behaviours that are useful, elegant, or adaptive. Sometimes, if a behaviour is visible, repeatable, and tolerated long enough, it can move for a group even when its function is unclear. So, the Jicarón case is not important because it makes Capuchins seem more human. It is important because it makes culture seem less tidy. Culture does not begin as art, language, or civilization. It begins more roughly than that, with attention, repetition, and the possibility that one animal's behaviour can become part of its species' legacy. Well, there you have it. So what do you think? Are Capuchins just bored out of their mind on Jicarón Island, looking for something to do? Or do you think there's some secret signaling going on between Capuchins that we just don't understand yet? Whatever you think, leave a comment below. I'd love to read about it. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time. Bye.